Welcome to Class 5. And in Class 5, we're going to be going through a few lessons about how to check your facts. That is, how to think more deeply about the things you can find on the web. Because, face it, the web is really big, and there's a lot of content out there, and a lot of it is of, well, really different opinions. So in this set of lessons, we're going to talk about some advanced methods to go check those facts, to dig more deeply into the ideas and the content, the things you might just find out there on the web. The first idea I really want you to think about here is what credibility means. Credibility is just how much you can find something that's believable or not. So let's talk about exactly what that means. Credibility is, first and foremost, not the same as ranking. So when we rank results, we put them in a sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. What we're doing is going off and crawling the web, finding all of the things that match your search query, and then putting them in the best, most relevant sequence. That is the rank order, the sequence of things that best match. That's not the same as credibility. So things might have, for example, lots of terms and lots of links to it, but that's not to say that number one result is the most credible result. It may be an incredible result, a totally crazy result, but it has a lot of properties that match your query. In particular, the way you frame your query, the terms you use, may make a big difference. So it's important for you to consider what terms you're using for your query. Because in essence, what you're doing is when you ask a query, ask a question to Google, you're giving it a set of search terms, a set of words, and saying, hey, Google, tell me what's the best match for these terms. And it's not the search engine's job to actually assess the credibility of the argument that's made on that web page. You can verify credibility by doing more searches. And if there's one thing to take away from this entire class, is that it's often really useful for you to go in and check one more thing. Let me try to make sure this piece of information is the same here as it is there. Because one of the properties of the web is that the cost of publishing any kind of content, good, bad, indifferent, crazy, is really low. It's really cheap. It's essentially zero. So what that means is that there are all kinds of opinions out there. And part of the class here, part of the lesson to learn, is that you should be checking more and more of that content to see if it holds together. Because ultimately, credibility is, can you believe something? Does it cohere? Does it hang together? So the key idea here is do one more search. So as you're searching for something, check the background of those things that you discover. Is there one more search you could do to verify whether or not that claim is accurate or not? And as I said, the search terms may make a huge difference. For instance, here are two Wikipedia pages side by side, both on the topic of the Falkland Islands or the Malvinas Islands, depending on how you query it. So if, for example, you're querying in Spanish and you type in the query Islas Malvinas, you'll get the web page in Wikipedia on the right. And if you do it in English and you say Falkland Islands, you'll get the web page on the left. Note that if you do a query for Malvinas in English, in the English Wikipedia, you'll also get this web page on the left. So one important thing to remember is that there can be variant opinions, that is, very different opinions about exactly the same topic. So here are two pages that are on ostensibly the same thing, but they have even different discovery dates for the islands. So something that should be easy to check, something that's objective like that, that is the discovery date, well, there can be variant opinions about that. So in this case, which search term you present to Google, to any search engine, will condition the kinds of results you get. We'll go into this more in future lessons, but keep that in mind. The terms you choose may profoundly affect the kinds of results you get back. So what I mean by this is it's often really useful to do that additional search, to do that additional kind of particular research on the background and how things hold together or not. One other thing you can do is to look more deeply into the URL itself. So first, you'll look at the web page and read through it and try to understand the background and the credibility and where that author is coming from, what their perspective is. But look at this. This is a made-up example, but it shows something that you can do that will help you to understand sometimes the internal arguments that are being made. So here's a website And you remember, this part is the name of the domain, so historywebsite.com. And as you can see, on the right-hand side, there's an article about the Panama Canal. But notice this directory, that is this word right here, imperialism. That word signals to you, the reader, that this writer is taking a particular stance. So when you read this article about the Panama Canal, I'm willing to bet that it has an argument about imperialism and the way that the Panama Canal was set up and structured to begin with. Another thing you can do, aside from looking inside the URL, is to do some basic checking. So in this case, I want to show you an example of what we call range checking. So there's a famous quote that has been attributed to Martin Luther King. It's, "I mourn the loss of thousands of precious lives, but I will not rejoice in the death of one, not even an enemy." Now this became an internet meme a few years ago, and it was widely attributed to Dr. King. So let me show you how I check this to get a sense for whether or not this is a correct attribution or not. So here we are, and I'm going to search for that quote. And what I'm going to do is put it in double quotes to do a phrase search. I'm going to search for "I mourn the loss of thousands of precious lives," like that. And I've got a lot of results. Now, Dr. King died in 1968. So let's do a little bit of a time range limiting to see when this quotation entered into public consciousness. I'm going to use search tools, and I'm going to do the time date restriction, custom range, and I'll say, let's start anywhere in the infinite past, up to, let's say, let's say 1997. Now I know Dr. King died in 1968, so this should be fairly good. And we see, interestingly enough, there are no results found for that quote by anyone. There are lots of results for this phrase without the quotations. That means these words in any order. There's a lot of those, but none that occur before 1997 in that particular sequence. So that's interesting. That's really interesting. And we can keep playing this range game, and we can start to see when it showed up into the popular culture. But it's really interesting that that phrase never was found, never published in any of the books, any of the documentaries, any of the biographies, any time in the intervening 30 years after his death. So that makes me really suspicious. You see what I'm doing here is I'm starting to take this idea of searching more deeply and making it into something real. Now, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and try the next activity and see if you can take some of these ideas about understanding what credible content is and how to use the skills you're learning in this class to help you dig more deeply into all the content that's on the web. Go ahead and try it out. See if you can do it.